Welcome to episode 20 of It's About Data, the podcast about analytics, AI, and whatever we feel like talking about. Your hosts are Matt Housley and Tony Baer. This episode, we're joined by Ollie Hughes, co-founder and CEO of Count.co. All right. Tony, welcome. And Ollie Hughes, you're our guest today. Thank you so much for joining us. You're the CEO of Count.co. Maybe you can briefly introduce yourself and then we'll dive into the topic.
I will. Thanks for having me. So I'm Ollie. I live, as you can probably tell from my accent, I live east of both of you. I live in just outside of London in the UK. I am one of the co-founders of Count.co. What are we? We're kind of an infinite canvas-based BI tool. So people often talk about us being like the Figma for data. We're kind of that infinite whiteboard which you can use to properly collaborate and do analytics and build out reports in a much more flexible way. And it's a terrible pitch. My go-to-market team are going to be really disappointed by how I position that. But that's what we are.
And I need to dig into your product more, but you also threw me kind of a hook of an interesting topic when we met before to discuss a potential episode. And that was, what is the role of a data team in a world of AI? And I think, frankly, having worked in data engineering and kind of overlapping with analytics and data science, there have been problems with data teams going back a decade, but AI has kind of made those more acute. And yet you founded a company that's based on data analytics. So obviously you believe that there's still a role and you believe that there's a role now. And so let's get into it.
I totally believe there's a role. I mean, I obviously that's a very clickbaity topic, right? I think right. The kind of role of a data team, ultimately it is a new industry. It's much more new as a function in an organization than say finance, HR, or marketing has been. So it's understandable that we still kind of discuss this regularly, like what actually is a data team for. We know it's important, but we as an industry, I think we're pretty bad at defining it in a way that the rest of the organization gets. So I think this is true now, and I think that's going to be more important to clarify when a lot of the day tasks of the day-to-day technical tasks we do maybe get diminished in size. So I think it's just this conversation is relevant now as it will be in 10, 20 years' time. It's like, what is the role of a data team and how to make that more valuable? I think that's a conversation we should be having. We should always be having anyway. But it's a thing which is kind of a thing. So we can talk about Count. Love to talk about Count. Obviously, I'm now building Count very much with this kind of idea of what as a data team should be post in an AI world that way. But this kind of question has been niggling me as like a side project while building out the business of like, actually, if I'm going to build a BI tool which is different and actually valuable, and I have a very low, if I'm honest, a relatively low view of some of the innovations in the market now, like, well, actually, what is the role of a data team? We need to know that. We need to have a view of that, an opinionated view of that. Otherwise, you're just building into the ether. You're just building everything. So it's been a pet project of mine, and something I found incredibly rewarding, actually, just talking to hundreds of data leaders, data teams in a whole variety of sectors, and just trying to work out, and quite empirically, frankly, like what makes a data team thrive and be at the core of the way their business works, and like really kind of just feel like the heartbeat of what they're doing is driving value, and comparing that to people who would put on the spot would acknowledge that they kind of feel like they're more of a support function. They're kind of they're busy, they're always busy, but they're not at the core of how the business operates. And like, what are the big differences between those two things? And it's been really, very humbling to have people talk about that so honestly. And from that, we've kind of developed this kind of sense of, well, there are some really important tasks which go beyond just doing the day-to-day, which a data team can really lean into. And I think they're kind of sufficiently valuable tasks, or they're kind of universally valuable to the business, that even if more of our work gets taken up by AI agentics, or we can stop writing SQL, if ever that will happen, these tasks are what you should be focusing. These are the North Star metrics that anyone in data should be thinking about. That's kind of where we then ended up with it. It's been really fun. It's been really great, and I love talking about it. So you've got to tell me to shut up as much as you can. Otherwise,
absolutely not. No. We brought you in to do the talking today, so we hired you without paying you for that purpose.
Sorry, what? No. It's been really great. So I want to be clear. Like, this is not what I want. What I think is really important. What I'm looking for, which we'll see, is I'm not looking this to be like my view. I'm trying to do this as in London particularly, and in the wider Europe, in Berlin and Amsterdam and Stockholm, like working with groups of data leaders to try and
Yeah.
build this out. I really have tried to like, what's the term, federate this out rather than be like, this is me. It's like, how can we make this a kind of a thing which everyone buys into? So that's been a really important part of this. I don't want to be, I'm happy to be the spokesman if I have to for now, but I don't
Yeah.
really want us to be the thing which is just for me. It should be a thing. I know it's helpful, basically. I know it's helpful to have a bit of a sense of what value is.
Yeah.
Let me dive in here, which is
Yeah,
that
please.
I'm looking at a very interesting historical perspective, because actually, in certain respects, the data team is not really new. In terms of that, basically, we're talking about the era of big data, and where basically we started to talk about data-driven enterprises, the area of Hadoop, and being able to widen our I guess our targets, the data that we never were able to really reach before, for analytics and then machine learning. And I recall, of course, back that infamous article in Harvard Business Review, I think back in 2012, which was basically data scientists being the sexiest job of the 21st century. Well, it's the sexy job of the 2010s, as it turns out. But I guess what I want to ask you, Ollie, is that we've had about a decade of where data has been under the spotlight, and actually, arguably, has come back into the spotlight this year because of AI. What I want to ask you is, like, in terms of the role of the data team. Well, first off, what did we learn during the decade of big data in terms of data teams? Because this is where they really started to come together. And how are things changed today? How have the ground rules changed today?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I want to clarify when I talk about data team. There's a carve out I want to make,
Okay.
which is I'm talking about the internal analytics function focused on making the organization make better decisions. The BI function, like how to make that function better. I think the value framework for commercially focused products like data engineering to like power, your app, or to sell data, or to power data experiences in software. I think that's a well understood value framework. That North Star metric is revenue ultimately, and all the good product thinking that would happen. It just happens to has a data flavor to it. So I think that's already what I'm thinking about. Like, actually, if you're in an organization, your job is to be BI, to be analytics, to help the business drive value. What does that look like? That's the carve out, I would say, because I think the big data wave has been on both sides. I think it's been more successful when it comes to like driving better products,
Yeah.
commercial products. I think that you can't deny that has been massively successul. Look at any tech company that's successful.
Yeah.
It's driven off the
Yeah.
back of collection, aggregation, and building out personalization, or whatever it is they've leveraged based on data. So I think that's fine. I think where there's been less innovation and there's been less success has been on leveling up internal analytics teams. Like, I would say that I don't think I'm as old as you. Don't want to say that exclusively. No one cares. But when I started my work out in data in 2005, well, sorry, maybe 2009, when I properly started getting into data commercially, when I started my career, the problems that I was facing as an analyst then are the same problems I think most data teams struggle with right now at the fundamental level, right? It hasn't been the success, the role, the ambiguity about whether I'm actually making an impact, or am I just answering requests all day long, or am I actually doing anything useful? Those anxieties exist now as much as they did, um, 10 years ago. We may have improved some of the stuff around data quality. We've also fragmented the data stack enormously. So there's more bloat to deal with now. But I'm not sure necessarily we can look back and say the innovation here was that our dashboards are more insightful than they were 10 years ago. That is a question I don't think people can really stand and say yes to.
Well, I want to dig into you talking about big data. I agree that big data was very successful for many businesses. I think it was also very unsuccessful for many businesses. And I actually think there are some parallels between what's gone wrong with analytics teams and what went wrong with a lot of big data deployments. And that is, both have been treated like this magical dust, and you sprinkle it on the business, and then you get insights out, and then you make better decisions. But the reality is, in both cases, companies deployed these huge data stacks, large teams without clear goals, and then they started asking questions like, well, why is this costing me so much money and I'm not seeing any value out of this? And so I think fundamentally more of a product approach is what is needed in both cases. Like, what are you actually trying to do with this thing that you're spending so much money on? If you don't have that up front, then the results are probably not going to be very positive. And I think you kind of alluded to this earlier, but there was often just this concierge approach where you'd spend all this money and then you just become this like team that would answer questions ad hoc without a lot of focus over time, spend a huge amount of time doing it and not deliver a lot of value.
Yeah, I completely agree. So it's, I mean, when you say product thinking on both sides, I think the question really, which I think on the internal analytics side of things is missing, is like, what is my product? What are the measures of success? If I'm building an internal analytics function, product, or service to the business, what are the North Star metrics of success of my team's role? I think that's very vague, and I've seen people measure horrific things like time to insight, or, don't get me wrong, I get the purpose behind it. I'm not digging that, but you kind of get into this kind of treadmill mentality. I call it a service trap. This idea of the service traps being like the understandable relationship that you can fall into with the business, where it's almost like a parent-child relationship, where like the data team is a subservient to the demands of the adult, the kind of other business functions demanding stuff. It's an unequal relationship. What you really want, as we all know, is like a peer-to-peer relationship, where it's adult to adult, where you can challenge back and effectively say, we need to do this. We need to have some tension between departments, just like there's often tension between sales and marketing about like who's actually driving the lead quality, who's picking up the sales, who's driving that. You want to have a bit of tension between a functioning data team should be providing tension, a kind of equilibrium balance between their role and what they do versus other functions. Otherwise, they're just doing whatever they're told, and that's obviously a support function mentality. So a lot of what I've been trying to work out is like, there are data teams out there who would definitely be like top of their game and feel like they're providing a adult to adult relationship, a natural tension between themselves and the wider company, which is good for both sides, as in because they're actually working problems and it's not a walkover. What are they doing differently to those who are just sort of dealing with JIRA tickets and just have this kind of sense of hopelessness that otherwise you get if the relationship is unequal? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I see some common themes here, and it's actually it's not an unusual theme, which is basically the data team needs to be aligned with the business, just like we've also traditionally said about technology teams and app dev teams. So there's, I think, a certain rule there, and I don't think that's anything that anyone can seriously disagree with. Of course, saying it's easier to pay lip service to that, but I want to take this in a slightly different direction, and kind of which might go back on that point, which is that let's take a look in terms of how the technology launching pad has changed today. And of course, today we have generative AI and generative AI, which has not as sentient, but it can provide other ways into finding and extracting information, and of course agents. And so I'm going to give you the provocative question about, are we here when we talk about making BI better, fighting the last war? Basically, will the new approach essentially make the idea of BI obsolete? Not necessarily what we're trying to do with BI obsolete, but will it make BI obsolete, or are there new approaches that really need to basically be considered here? Not only basically assuming the fact that teams need to become better aligned, but that the technology needs to be better aligned.
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of do have a worry. If I'm honest, I have a worry that a lot of the way you're seeing AI being brought into the BI tools doubles down on an approach I don't think works. What I mean by that is when I talk, like, what I believe makes a data team valuable, as I said, isn't just churning out dashboards and charts all day long, right? So that activity is damaging to the business, and it's certainly damaging to the value the data team brings. So if we're aligning AI to just double down on the bad behaviors of a data team, which is just simply to provide massive amounts of noise and information to the business, then that's not going to deliver much of that. You're making it more efficient to do bad stuff, basically. I mean, to put it another way, one of the innovations that has been huge in BI, and credit to like the founders of Looker who did this, like building a kind of solid semantic layer model. I mean, not that they did the first, but like building a kind of way to federate out solid, trusted data in a semantic layer in a BI tool to allow more one source of the truth, has enabled some organizations to have a much they're not the bottleneck isn't the data team anymore, because the data team provides a solid base, and then there's self-service. In certain teams, we've seen that there's value in that, but I think we know that if you go to those organizations who have used Looker for many years, they are now swamped with information. They are swamped with dashboards. They are swamped with charts and looks, and they have more data than they know what to do with. And they're almost stagnating, not because they haven't got data, but because they've got too much. So we almost know the experiment of like, if I just ask my AI any question that comes to my brain, we know we kind of already had seen have had early sight of how difficult that gets. Like, I don't necessarily believe like unfederated amounts of noise and information being pumped into you by lots of agents is going to make your life easier. Might get cheaper, but is it going to make you more productive, more effective, more competitive? Not sure. So there is efficiency gains to be had. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for that. But I'm saying that like if you just amp up the chart generating machine even more than you already have with analysts and make AI versions of analysts, and they keep doing just chart generation, we know the end game is just noise, just information noise. And I think that's the key, is like that insight leads you to saying, well, actually, what activities matter most now for a daily team to be doing? And then when AI comes, what can they accelerate in the right behaviors? So let me give an example of this. I've been talking about this framework, and I haven't explained any of it yet. One of the most striking things that I've seen from data teams who are, as I said, that kind of challenger, that high functioning team who are driving value versus the ones who are kind of clearly in a support function mentality, is that they are working really hard to drive what I would call operational clarity. Like they rather than just pumping out dashboards and charts into the business based on any request the business gives, that they see their role as being the arbiters of truth and creating a high degree of, if you bear the analogy, like a high signal to noise ratio. If you're an engineer, you know what I mean? Like the max amount of clarity of what's really going on with the least amount of noise, least amount of information being used to get there. So that's a really powerful, that's a very different kind of mentality to more charts, more value. It's saying less charts, more value, more great charts, or very few highly thought through reports which give very clear view of what really matters in this business that everyone can align around. That is the most important thing my team needs to do. And from that falls good things. And we're going to work really hard to minimize the reporting estate in our business. We're going to work really hard to maximize the understanding of what matters most and how clear and how simple our business looks and feels. And that's our clarity being our North Star metric, not charts generated.
Yeah. Okay, so I have two follow-up questions to this. One is, how do we train people to do this? I mean, I think a lot of people who work in analytics come out of school and they're used to just fulfilling assignments that the professors ask them to do, and they just fall right back into that same pattern in a business. How do we train people to be this kind of engaged data professional that questions things and suggests strategies and such, like you're saying, and pushes back, as opposed to just taking assignments? And second, how do we actually give people and give data teams the social capital to do this within an organization?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's back to that kind of, I've said this like idea of operational clarity to hundreds of data leaders, and they go, like, some of it's just like, some people just go, that's obvious. Some people go, light bulb moment. Of course, I'm just completely, I'm going to go away and think about this for a bit, but that makes it look like I now have a better focus. I think you're not going to get, if you're getting a graduate in to help, they already have the skills to do this. I would say critical thinking, they already know this. If they've been taught well, particularly in STEM subjects, they already are thinking critically. They're thinking about experimentation. They're thinking about how to break problems down. I would say that what we're missing in the industry is data leaders who can lead, who already know this is true, to lead on this. And I think it's back to that kind of self-definition piece. I really think we suffer most by this not being a well-understood concept in the data world. Like, if we all were to go, yeah, actually a role of the data team is to provide clarity of the organization. And actually our job is to say no to every request we get because I want to maintain clarity.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go for that as my North Star. And I know good things fall out of that. And we get into the, like, I've already got people I know who are kind of data leaders who work with us on this, have led on that journey, done it, left an organization in a better place, and now on their like the next gig, and they're leading there. And I can already see it happening. And I can already see that once you've got it in place, then you're training the next generation of analysts to do the same thing. So I think it's got to come top down, is what I'm saying, rather than bottom up. Like I don't think you're going to find the data analysts of tomorrow going to struggle with this concept. They just need to be led the right way and trained up that way. And I think we need to, as an industry, this is back to, if we understand what our North Star metrics and we talk to the business this way, you'll find it surprisingly receptive. One of the very powerful use cases that Count is good at, our tool, which we've built this, having found this out, is that we're very good at letting you build metric trees, like KPI trees, like in one go. Live data showing you the hierarchy of your levers of growth, your revenue broken down by channel or geography, so you can really understand the segmentation. And the number of times an executive just gets excited to see what they have in their brain clarified on paper so they can actually look at it and feel like their cognitive load in their brain has dropped. It's incredible. So I think actually what we're finding is this concept makes sense. When it's done, people respond well. And I think it's just about getting that into the habit, and you'll find it's not that difficult, actually.
Nice.
I'm fine. Anyway.
No, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining. We like to keep this brief, but maybe we'll have you on again sometime as the situation with text to SQL and generative AI and everything else evolves going forward.
No worries.
Excellent. Well, have a great Friday. This episode will debut on a Wednesday, but enjoy your weekend in the meantime.
Thank you so much.
Okay. And chill down there in the UK.
Yeah. Good luck with the summer heat. Take care.
Thanks.
Yeah.